The air in the Metropolitan Museum Gala Hall was heavy with the scent of lilies and old money. I stood near the marble pillars, watching my father, Harrison Whitaker, hold court with a circle of men who measured their worth in skyscrapers. He caught my eye for a split second, then looked away with a grimace that told me I was the only stain on his perfect evening. I adjusted my simple black dress, feeling the familiar weight of being a ghost in my own family. Harrison's voice boomed across the marble floor as he laughed at a joke made by a tech mogul. He was a man who believed the world revolved around his bank balance and the prestige of his name. My brother Grant stood beside him, preening in a $5,000 suit that he hadn't earned. Grant was the golden child because he had followed our father into the family firm, while I had chosen a path they couldn't understand. To them, my career was just a waste of a good Whitaker pedigree. I had been back in the States for less than 48 hours after a 6-month deployment in a place they couldn't find on a map. My skin was still tanned from the desert sun, and my mind was still adjusting to the lack of mortar sirens. But here, the only danger was the sharp tongues and the cold stares of the elite. I watched my mother, Beatrice, adjust her diamond necklace with trembling fingers. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and fear, knowing that my presence always agitated Harrison. Harrison began to lead his group toward the reserved VIP table near the stage. It was a prime position, meant for the most influential donors and the evening's honored guests. As I began to follow, my father stopped abruptly and placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. His eyes were cold, reflecting the glitter of the chandeliers but none of their warmth. "You are not sitting here, Maya," he said in a low, sharp whisper. I felt a sting of public humiliation, but I kept my face as neutral as a stone wall. "This table is for people who actually contribute to society," Harrison continued. "You can find a spot in the back with the staff or the junior donors. Your little khaki career doesn't buy you a seat at this level of conversation." He didn't wait for my response before turning his back on me to pull a chair out for a senator's wife. Grant smirked at me, his eyes filled with a petty triumph that felt smaller than anything I had seen in combat. "Don't worry, Maya. There might be some sliders left at the bar," he joked. I stood there, a major in the United States Army, being treated like a stray dog at my own family's event. I didn't argue or make a scene because my world had taught me that the loudest person in the room is often the weakest. I simply turned and walked toward the shadows near the catering entrance. I found a quiet spot near a tall window that looked out over Central Park. The city lights were beautiful, but they felt distant and artificial compared to the stars I had seen in the mountains of the Middle East. My father had no idea that while he was arguing over property taxes, I was managing a tactical operations center. He didn't know that my voice was the one that determined whether 30 men lived or died. To him, I was just a disappointing daughter who liked to play soldier. A few minutes later, the room began to quiet as the master of ceremonies took the stage. He began to speak about the night's special guest, a hero whose name had been in the headlines for months. Captain Caleb Thorne was a man I knew better than my own brother. I had been the one on the other end of the radio when his team was pinned down in a narrow valley. I had coordinated the air support that cleared his path to safety. Harrison was leaning forward in his seat, his face bright with the hope of making a new connection. He loved heroes as long as they were useful to his social standing. He saw Thorne as a trophy to be collected, a symbol of American strength that he could use to polish his own image. My father had spent the last hour telling everyone how much he supported the troops, despite never having spent a day in boots. I watched from the back, hidden by the shadows of the Roman statues. Captain Thorne walked onto the stage, looking uncomfortable in his dress blues. He was a man built for action, not for speeches and champagne. His eyes scanned the room, looking for something or someone amidst the sea of tuxedos. He didn't look like a celebrity. He looked like a man who was still carrying the weight of the men he had lost. When he spoke, his voice was steady, but lacked the performative energy of the politicians. He thanked the donors for their money, but he reminded them that freedom wasn't bought with checks. It was bought with the lives of people who were willing to go into the dark places. Harrison was nodding vigorously, trying to catch Thorne's eye from his front row seat. My father probably thought he was Thorne's equal because they both occupied the same room. He had no concept of the brotherhood that exists between those who have bled together. After the speech, Thorne stepped down from the stage and was immediately swarmed by the VIPs. Harrison was the first one to reach him, thrusting a hand out with a practiced smile. "Captain, an incredible honor," my father boomed. "I'm Harrison Whitaker, and I want you to know that this family stands behind you." Thorne took his hand, but his expression remained polite and professional, lacking the warmth Harrison expected. Grant pushed his way forward, trying to get into the photo op. "My sister is in the service, too," Grant said, his tone suggesting it was more of a hobby than a profession. "She's around here somewhere, probably at the bar." Harrison chuckled, patting Thorne on the arm like they were old friends. "Yes, Maya is a bit of a wanderer, but we're hoping she'll find a real career soon. They were using me as a punchline to build rapport with a man who would have died for me." Thorne's smile didn't just fade, it vanished. He pulled his hand away from my father's grip, and his entire posture shifted. He went from a guest of honor to a predator in a room full of prey. "Did you say Maya Whitaker?" Thorne asked, his voice suddenly cold enough to frost the glass. Harrison blinked, confused by the sudden change in temperature. "Yes, my daughter," he said, still trying to maintain his jovial tone. Thorne didn't look at my father anymore. He began to look around the room with laser-like focus. He ignored the senator who was trying to ask him a question. He ignored the cameras that were flashing in his face. He saw me standing by the catering door, a lone figure in a black dress. I didn't move, and I didn't wave. I just stood there, observing the scene as I would any other mission. Thorne began to walk toward me, cutting through the crowd like a knife through silk. The people in his path moved aside, sensing the sudden intensity of his movement. Harrison and Grant followed, him, looking baffled and slightly panicked. They probably thought he was going to complain about me or ask for me to be removed. My father was already preparing his apology for whatever embarrassment I had caused. When Thorne reached me, he didn't say a word at first. He came to a halt exactly 2 paces away and snapped his heels together. The sound of his boots hitting the floor echoed through the silent room. He raised his hand in a crisp, perfect salute. "Major Whitaker," he said, his voice ringing out so everyone could hear. "It is an honor to see you again, ma'am." The silence that followed was absolute. I could see the color draining from my father's face, leaving him looking like a ghost. Grant's mouth was hanging open, his petty smile replaced by a look of sheer disbelief. The people at the nearby tables began to whisper, their eyes darting between the decorated hero and the woman they had ignored all night. I returned the salute with the same precision Thorne had shown. "Carry on, Captain," I said, my voice calm and steady. Thorne dropped his hand, but remained at a rigid position of attention. "Ma'am, the boys and I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you," he said. "We owe you everything." Harrison stepped forward, his voice a pathetic squeak. "Major?" he stammered. "Maya, what is he talking about?" You work in an office. Thorne turned his head slightly to look at my father, and the look in his eyes made Harrison flinch. She is the commander of the most elite tactical unit in the region, Thorne said. She is the one who makes the calls that the Pentagon relies on. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink into the minds of the socialites. In my world, your money doesn't mean a thing, but her name means life or death. Just then, a man in a dark suit with a small lapel pin stepped out of the crowd. It was Senator Miller, a man Harrison had been trying to meet for 3 years. He didn't look at Harrison. He walked straight to me and extended his hand with genuine respect. Major Whitaker, I didn't realize you were the daughter Harrison mentioned, the senator said. I've spent all week in briefings hearing about your success with Operation Phoenix. The senator turned to my father, who was now trembling. Harrison, you didn't mention your daughter was a legend in special operations, Miller said. You told me she was struggling to find her way. My father couldn't speak. He looked like a man who had just realized he had been holding a winning lottery ticket and had used it to light a cigarette. The prestige he had been chasing was standing right in front of him, and he had spent the night trying to hide it. Grant tried to interject, his voice high and nervous. We just didn't want to brag, he lied. But nobody was listening to Grant anymore. The gravity in the room had shifted, and I was now the center of it. People who had looked through me 10 minutes ago were now trying to position themselves for an introduction. I felt no satisfaction in their attention, only a deep sense of clarity about who these people really were. Captain Thorne remained by my side like a loyal guard. He knew exactly what he had done, and he knew why it mattered. He had seen the way they treated me, and he had decided to correct the record with the only language they understood: status. My father had spent my life trying to teach me the value of a good name. In the end, it only took one of mine for him to lose all of his. I looked at Harrison, who was now being sidelined by the very people he wanted to impress. They were moving around him to get closer to the senator and the major. He was left standing in the wake of his own arrogance. Maya, let's go back to the table, he suggested, his voice desperate for a way to save face. I have plenty of room for you now. I looked him in the eye and saw the fear of a man who realized his social currency was bankrupt. No, thank you, Harrison, I said. I think I preferred the view from the back of the room. I turned to Thorne and the senator, dismissing my family with a single look. Why don't we go somewhere quieter and talk about the upcoming transition? Thorne nodded, a small smirk playing on his lips. As we walked away, I heard the hushed conversations of the guests. They weren't talking about Harrison's real estate deals anymore. For the rest of the night, I was the guest of honor, without ever having asked for it. I spoke with men and women who actually understood the cost of service. We didn't talk about money or prestige. We talked about duty and the people we had left behind. My mother watched from a distance, her eyes wet with tears. I think she finally understood that I hadn't been lost all these years. I had just been living in a world she was too afraid to acknowledge. Harrison and Grant left early, slipping out of the side exit like the ghosts they had tried to make of me. They didn't say goodbye, and I didn't look for them. The bridge between us hadn't been burned by me. It had been dismantled by their own inability to see anything beyond their own reflections. My father had wanted a daughter he could show off, but he couldn't handle the woman I had actually become. The next morning, the sun rose over the city with a cold, clear light. I was back at the airfield, preparing for my flight to the Pentagon. My phone was blowing up with messages from my father. He was apologizing, making excuses, and asking me to come to dinner. He even mentioned that he had cleared a permanent spot for me on the board of his foundation. I read the messages with a detached curiosity, like a historian examining a fossil. He didn't want to know me. He wanted to own the prestige that came with my rank. He wanted to use my success to fix the damage he had done to his own reputation. I didn't reply to any of them. I simply archived the messages and turned off the phone. I had work to do, and my world didn't have room for people who only loved the uniform when it was convenient for them. I boarded the transport plane, feeling the familiar vibration of the engines through the floor. Captain Thorne was there, already busy with his gear. He looked up and gave me a knowing nod. We didn't need to talk about what happened at the gala. It was just another mission accomplished, another objective secured. The plane took off, leaving the gilded world of Harrison Whitaker far below. A year later, I was standing on a sun-baked runway in a different part of the world. I was no longer a major. The stars on my shoulders were new, and the responsibility was even heavier. I was addressing my unit, the men and women who were my real family. I looked out at their faces, covered in dust and sweat, and I felt a sense of peace that no ballroom could ever provide. I spoke to them about honor, not as a word, but as a practice. I told them that the world would often try to define them by their lowest moments or their quietest roles. But the truth was found in the work they did when no one was watching. I thought about my father's empty toasts and Grant's hollow laughter. Their world was built on sand, while mine was forged in the fire of shared risk. When the ceremony was over, I walked back to my office. An email notification popped up on my laptop from an address I had almost forgotten. It was Grant. He was asking for a favor, something about a government contract for a new development project. He mentioned how proud the family was of my new promotion to lieutenant colonel. He even included a photo of a new plaque Harrison had put up in the corporate lobby. The plaque had my name on it, along with a list of my decorations. They were using my blood and sweat to decorate their hallway. I didn't feel angry. I just felt a deep, profound sense of pity for them. They were still trying to buy a piece of a world they would never inhabit. They were still looking for shortcuts to a respect that could only be earned. I hit the delete button on the email. I didn't need their pride, and I certainly wasn't going to be their bridge to more money. My life was defined by the people I served with and the missions we completed. I pulled a classified folder toward me and began to review the next set of orders. The cover was stamped with a single word that summed up everything I had become. Phoenix. My father thought respect was something you acquired at dinner parties through loud talk and expensive wine. I had learned it was something you earn in the silence of the night and the chaos of the fight. If you have ever had to outrank your own blood just to get them to see you, you know that the best revenge isn't a shout. It is a silent, perfect salute that changes everything. I looked out the window as a transport plane took off into the sunset. The world was large, and there was so much more to do than worry about the opinions of small men. I was Major Maya Whitaker, and I was finally home, even if home was a place my family could never reach. The ledger was closed, and the mission continued.